Poštovana Dijana, ne čujemo vas. Morate uključiti mikrofon.
Yeah. Mislim da se sada čujemo, zar ne? Da li me sada čujete?
Čujemo vas.
Da. Pa, dobrodošli, dragi panelisti i učesnici, dragi gosti, dobro nam došli na ASITEŽ Inkubator, događaj posvećen pravima dece i mladih na kulturu i umetnost. Nastavit ću sa par uvodnih reči na engleskom jeziku, pošto je sa nama danas na prvom panelu i posebna i draga gošća iz Afrike, direktorka ASITEŽa Južne Afrike, Ivet Hardi, neko ko ima ogromno iskustvo kao predsjednica izvršnog odbora Svetskog ASITEŽa u 10 godina prošlih do 2021. od 2011. A posle prvog panela nastavit ćemo druga dva panela na srpskom jeziku. So, dear panelists, participants, dear guests, we welcome you to the first ASITEŽ Incubator event devoted to the right of the children and young to culture and art. We are now talking in English, and two other panels will be which are following the very first panel is in Serbian. And I have to say that with us today we have our guest from South Africa, Ivet Hardi, and this is the reason why we are talking in English. So the rights of children and young to culture and art are in the focus of today's Inkubator, a topic that we wanted to put in our spotlight for quite some time as an important yet often neglected issue, both from the perspective of children's rights as well as from the position of culture and arts. With full respect for the vital importance of other, more pressing topics in the field of children's rights that are most often in the focus of the public and responsible institutions, we still believe that the right of the child to participate fully in the cultural and artistic life should receive more attention in both professional and general public. This topic is especially relevant at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, common to the whole world, which disturbs children and young people very deeply. At the start of the third consecutive year of the ongoing COVID crisis, which brings rapid changes in the world, we are witnessing alarming consequences to so-called new normal, in which the children, along with adults, are continuously exposed to uncertainty and insecurity, as well as deprived their natural environment, the school, socializing, meeting with their peers, and sharing experiences that are key to acquiring and developing social and emotional competencies. Children themselves clearly speak about the lack of live contact, while growing research indicates the devastating effects of these changes and the immense danger they pose to the mental health of children and young people. Children and young people have the right to access and participate in the arts, even and especially in times of crisis. It's stated in the editorial of the manifesto of the ASITEŽ International, a document that encourages us to this project. The right of children and youth to culture and arts as a complex topics, combining different fields and disciplines, requires a comprehensive, interdisciplinary and cross-sectional approach to the involvement of the representatives of various state and international and institutions, civil society, organization and actors in culture, arts, education, health, and all others areas during dealing with the children and young people. In other words, all those who works and goal focus on the well-being of new generation, thus ensuring them with a safe and high quality childhood that is essential for prosperity of this whole society. Today, event is designed as an incubator, as the title suggests, with which we want to launch a series of events and invite that will initiatives that will provide a wider framework for a broad discussion on this topic, in the hope that we will inspire and mobilize our colleagues and all others interested in the topic to join in collective rethinking and discussioning through the upcoming year. We aim to gather all the reflections, inputs, and ideas from these talks that we will host in 2022, and as a result, present them in the framework of the ASITEŽ Artistic Gathering that will take place in 2023 in Belgrade and Novi Sad, which will begin with a thematic conference of child rights to arts. I would like to thank all the participants who are with us today and wish you a fruitful and inspiring discussion. And last but not the least, we hope that this event will spark more interest among the representatives of relevant state institutions and organizations to join us in discussing this topic, including those who were not able to respond to our invitation at this occasion. Our invitation is still open, as we believe that dialogue is a crucial precondition for improving the states of play in the field of culture and arts, as well as in this particular topic. Open, participative, and collaborative process that provides space for honest consideration of the current situation and acknowledgement of consecutive proposals for overcoming obstacles and problems is a vital step for the raising awareness on the position and value the rights of the children and youth to culture and art, in the line with its place in the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass the word to our colleague Tatjana Nikolic, researcher, assistant, and PD, candidate of University of Arts in Belgrade in the field of cultural policy, who will be moderating the very first panel today to tell you more about the agenda and event today. Tanya, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. It is my pleasure to facilitate the first session of today's conference that will be held under the title Children and Youth in Focus, and that managed to gather more than relevant speakers who could shed a light on our today's topic from different, diverse, but very relevant angles and perspectives. As you could read, our speakers today are Ivet Hardi, Director of ASITEŽ South Africa and former President of the ASITEŽ International, Maša Avramović, pedagogue, researcher, and lecturer at the Southern University in Stockholm, also children's rights to arts and education activist, as well as Dijana Kržanić-Stepavac, President of the Executive Board of ASITEŽ Srbija, drama pedagogue, actress, former member of the board of ASITEŽ International. We will start with the opening expose by our esteemed colleague and friend, Ms. Ivet Hardi. Mrs. Hardi will share with us a global picture on understanding and policies for children's rights to culture and arts. So a wider picture to start from. Also her experience, her significant experience with advocating for children's rights to arts, as well as maybe some most relevant information on how did ASITEŽ International Manifesto came to reality.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, and thank you, Diana, for this invitation. It's wonderful to be here with you. I apologize that I can't speak Serbian, and so that everybody else has to be speaking English on my behalf. But thank you for putting up with that. I wanted to start off with just reflecting on the fact that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is one of the most widely ratified international human rights treaties in history. It has 196 state parties as signatories. Now, this makes it a very significant document. And within it, we have a template for a number of intrinsic child protections, which are framed around the best interests of the child, and of course, their basic right to survival and to development. But I think that one of the most important things about the convention is that within the broader convention, there is quite a radical acknowledgement of the child's rights to their own independence and selfhood, a recognition of their agency in the world, of their role as participatory citizens, and not just as citizens in the making. So their views, their right to self-expression, their freedom to participate in the life of the society, and of course, most particularly in culture and the arts, which is what we're here to discuss today, is to be supported and respected and promoted. Now, this quite radical aspect of the convention is, I believe, the part of the convention that many state parties have most trouble with. So even in my own context, coming from South Africa, where we are a very divided country, we have extremes of rich and poor, of a small group of people who have, and very many people who have very little. It is often very difficult to make the argument for why all of these rights are important, not just the rights to do with protecting the child or ensuring that the child is able to develop through, for example, being fed, having a home, having parents, having care, etc. Very often, we are having to argue for this sense of the autonomy of the child. And often this is also a cultural difficulty. So within South Africa is a very diverse country, many different cultures. Not all cultures recognize the autonomy of children. In some cultures, there's more of a sense of children need to be seen and not heard. They shouldn't be expressing their views. They need to do what they're told. We still have instances of child marriage in South Africa, even though it is outlawed. But we have a number of different situations in which adults feel that they have the right to make choices for children. Now, I think that one of the things that the convention does very beautifully is it basically shows us that our approach to rights has to, in fact, be an integrated one. It can't be hierarchical. So it's not that you can, you first have to feed children and then you have to get them at home and then you have to do something else. And only then at the very end, when they are privileged in every other respect, should they have rights to freely express themselves or to experience the culture and the arts within their particular environment. These things need to be integrated, and they need to be simultaneous, essentially. And in fact, they serve one another. Because if children are to survive the sometimes very difficult circumstances in which they find themselves, they need even more acutely tools to do that. And where do they find these tools? They find these tools in their play, in their access to culture, in their access to the arts. So we've seen again and again in international studies how when other aspects of a child's life may be falling to pieces, when education is poor, or when the home environment is poor, or when there are other social problems that the child is being exposed to, which are in fact in counter to what the convention is saying. The arts provide a mechanism for children to feel more empowered, to feel more hopeful, to have a sense of who they are in the world and what they want to achieve with their lives, and to have a sense of a future. And in the end, I think the most important thing that we can give a child is a sense of the future. And I think right now, one of the great dilemmas that we are facing is the fact that because of our environmental degradation and the way we have treated our world, our future is in fact in peril. And so we are seeing more and more children who have deep anxiety about a future. They are finding it harder and harder to see that future. Now, how can they see a future? Well, they can see a future if they are able to engage with the arts. Why? Because the arts allow us to see beyond the here and now, to make connections between things that were before unrelated. But in making those connections, we are able to see new possibilities. And so really the arts, and when I speak about the arts, I'm also meaning broadly all of the activities from very early childhood, which are frankly a child's natural way of being in the world, right? If you think about how a child exists in the world, they exist in relation to their senses and in a state of play. That is a child's natural environment and condition. And the arts are simply an extension of that. So if we are able to protect that space where the child can continue to play, can continue to engage artistically, both from the point of view of self-expression and also in response to what others are creating. So we are then able to activate some of these really important elements that are so needed for the 21st century and that have been highlighted as being most important for the 21st century. Things like critical and creative thinking, things like empathy, which have become more and more important because of all the artificial intelligence that is being built into our world now as part of the fourth industrial revolution. You know, how are we going to understand what machines are doing and understand whether they're doing the right things if we don't have empathy? So as human beings, these skills have become more and more important. So I think that, you know, for me, that was just to frame how I see these things as being interlinked. But as Diana mentioned in her introduction, when the pandemic hit, and suddenly we were in a situation where ASITEŽ centers across the world were experiencing a similar thing. They were seeing children robbed of those experiences, those artistic experiences. They were seeing them cloistered in homes, some of those homes not in any way conducive to their being able to learn or being able to, you know, express who they are, etc. And all of us as ASITEŽ members basically had this feeling that there was a fundamental shift that was happening, which was potentially dangerous, or it was dangerous, but also was potentially a window of opportunity in a sense. Because I think that when things change radically, in that process of radical change, you have the opportunity to make an intervention and to have your voice heard in a way that perhaps you were complacent about before. And so this is where ASITEŽ centers came together to look at how could we really put meat behind this idea of children's access to the arts. And, you know, we always talk about Article 31 and Article 13. I find it interesting how in Article 31, there are two parts to it. The first part is about recognizing the right of the child to play and recreational activities and to participate freely in the cultural life and the arts. But the second one is, in fact, I think more important, because it's saying that the state parties shall respect and promote the right of the child to participate fully in cultural and artistic life, and shall encourage the provision of appropriate and equal opportunities for that to happen, right? Now, if you think about it, in many ways, ASITEŽ centers exist because we believe that. We believe that all children, regardless of whether they have the economic capacity to attend the theatre or not, they have a right to appropriate and equal opportunities to culture, the arts, etc. And so for us, there was this great kind of moment of recognition of what it was that was really driving ASITEŽ as an organization, and we wanted to make a joint statement. So the manifesto, which I will just share for a moment, I hope you've all seen it, you know something about it, but you'll see here that it speaks very definitely to the rights of a child. It mentions here Article 12, it speaks to Article 13 and Article 31. But then what it does essentially is it looks at all the state actors and the, in a sense, private actors that might be able to have an impact on the situation. So it's calling citizens, it's calling governments, it's calling political parties, departments for education, departments for culture, local authorities, arts councils where they exist. Of course, they don't exist in all countries, arts organizations and theatres. So we're now getting down to slightly more micro level, schools and early year settings, the media, and then of course ourselves, ASITEŽ as the organization, you know, to together co-create the conditions where these rights can start to be equally and appropriately provided to all children, particularly in the light of this, you know, pandemic and all of the things that it has robbed us of. And I think that really what it has allowed us to do is to express very strongly why we exist at all. And it's also opened a door to conversations with a lot of different moving parts, if you like, different, you know, sectors that perhaps as artists, we were not seeing it as necessary to speak to before. So it's been a really interesting process, and we can talk about this in more detail when we get into the conversation, but it's been a really interesting process of centers and artists coming together with unexpected partners, in a sense, during this time, to try and find ways to provide that access, particularly because it has been under threat. So I think I'll end there for the moment, and then we can pick up on some more sort of detailed points in the general conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hardie, for everything that you just shared and presented. It was definitely important to get a wider perspective, and not only to start directly from Serbia, but to get the whole global perspective before we go deeper into the topic throughout the whole day. We could continue in the same direction. We could continue demystifying and clarifying our topic for today. So Maša, Diana, why is this topic important in Serbia and in other parts of the world? What does it consist of? What are all the different dimensions of children's rights to arts that we should bear in mind when conceptualizing programs, when designing policies, and so on? This is a complex topic, and which parts of it, which dimensions, which issues you think are most important to be emphasized at the moment? And then, of course, Ms. Hardie also, if she wants to add something on this point further on.
Diana, may I start?
Yes, please do.
I think, first of all, thank you, Yvette. It was just so beautiful, the expose that you made. And it's just straight to the point. And this is why I wanted to continue, because I would like to join you, and I would like to discuss children's right to culture and to point out some of the elements or aspects of this right that I think are particularly important globally, but also locally. Because I think still in our local context, there are some misunderstandings of this right. And as you say, it has been neglected. And why is that? I would like to start with this notion that children's rights to culture and art is actually one of the fundamental rights for children's growth and well-being, and also participation in society. Not only in art in a narrow sense, society on a wider sense. And I also think this is a fundamental right for development of culture itself and the renewal of culture in participation and in collaboration with the young generation. And I think here we can connect with this sense of the future, because culture is not just to be preserved or transferred, but rather to be co-created and recreated and renewal with young generation, in collaboration between generations, in fact. And despite all of that, children's right to culture and art is often narrowed down and often marginalized, and it's often understood as a cultural offer to children. So it becomes the question, how many programs? First of all, do we have any programs for children to participate in culture? And then we assume that if there are some programs, then this right is implemented. But I believe that this topic is much more complex and much more fundamental. So I would just like to point out some of the more comprehensive understanding of this right in a couple of bullet points, and then maybe it's much more interesting to engage in conversation. For me, children's rights to culture and art, first of all, opens up a space for mutuality between generations. So as I said, the culture is not something to be passed on young generation, transferred to young generation, but rather co-created between generation. And I think this right provides us a ground to think about in this way. Another aspect is that this right tackles the question of human and child condition. What does it mean to be a human and to be a child? And it tackles this fundamental capacity for creation. That is the base of our beings and of our civilization as well. So as human beings, we have this capacity to create, to imagine, to invent, to create the world out of our imagination. And in this particular moment and the challenges of 21st century, this is something that is crucial, I believe, for the sense of the future, as Yvette was speaking about. And actually, when we look at children, this capacity for creation is something that children have from the very moment when they are born. And perhaps children are in advantage comparing to us adults when it comes to this capacity. And maybe artists are those who are closer to children capacity for creation. So I think if we think about this right as something that is so fundamental human and something that is crucial both for children, but also for the civilization, then we can think much more about the importance of this right. And actually the common of play, of art, of culture is exactly that it is this manifestation of the capacity for creation. At the same time, through art and culture, we pose ethical and existential questions. And it's very important when we look at these clips of these young people who discuss culture and art, you could see that often they refer to some of the existential questions. How did we live in past and how do we live now? We want to communicate, to debate, one of the young guys said. So I think it is also about that true fundamental questions of our existence are posed through art, aesthetical experiences as well, sensorial, embodied experiences, new lines of thinking, and new ways of acting in the world. So I think this aspect of opening those questions is also a very important one. And then it's also the question about creation of who we are, self-creation, but also creation of one generation. And I think very often we are speaking about the generation of artists, for example, or generation of people who are in the culture, and we speak, oh, this generation of artists brought this or that. But I also think that we can speak about a generation of children who participated in particular forms of art, or generation of children who grow up in particular cultural milieu or artistic milieu. And I think that is important that we recognize that through art and culture, children are not only participants and citizens in making, but rather children's public, so that we can have culture with children, and one generation through culture can become visible, and its own questions and its own perspectives of the world can be visible. So, and I will end here, that this right actually contain all of these aspects of mutuality between generation, posing key questions for both young people and for the society, and forming one generation who also shares or should have a right to share view on the world and imagine new world or world in becoming, so to speak. So I think when we broaden the understanding of this right, then we can see how fundamental it is for individual children, but also for the society. So I thought that this was something that I wanted to share, because very, very little, I think we have even a chance to speak on this more deeper level about this right.
Wow, what a wonderful and inspiring speeches you gave us, Maša. Thank you so much. And also Yvette, this is really inspiring and fantastic. And this is exactly what we needed, because it is so essential that the artists who are dealing also from this point, from this angle of all these questions, are very need support to go further on, because there are so many obstacles. And I would like to stress and underline that the artists are always in this very big crisis in the society, is the very first one that instantly react on the crisis and recognize the threats. And it is a case in Serbia for many times. We have witnesses like in the 90s when it was a war around us, and the reaction of the artists have been exactly to go to work with the young ones and to support them. We will see in some examples later on in other panels. It will be wonderful samples how the people have reacted on this, the artists and some. And then I would like to say that they always, like in 2014, the floods, that was also the very big threat, and the artists have raised the voice toward to work with them, but they react in defense of the basic human values such as empathy and solidarity, and the need to defend the society, to establish the much normalcy, especially the normalcy of life of the children and youth found themselves in the uncertainty and in insecurity. And I think it is very big a question of the segregation of the art which is divided, the art for the adults and for the young ones. This is a really big question amongst us in the field of the art. If the artisticness conveying the basic human values points to them or warns of their lack, and this is important for new generation to know that the performing arts has especially place in this particular moment, because the participants share same space and in live encounter. So how the artists are going to work if they don't have agreement upon what is the childness, the childhood, the child, if they don't find a really basic respect to the child. And this is something that we have to urge to work amongst ourselves to understand better, because I've seen in many cases that the artists themselves also have to deeply go out to understand what is the base of the childhood and how to address. This is one point that I would like very much to stress. On the other hand, this is a very bigger power that artistry can work. And also it depends on, as Yvette has said before, the culture, our cultures that we are working and in it, how they are approaching to the childhood and what is understanding of the voice of the child. This is really very deep, essential questions that we have to face with. And there must be somehow that we build a consensus about it, that there are all our forces that we have on disposal, and the multidisciplinary approach that we have to work. We urge to work together. This is the consensus that we have to find out all together, and not only through the art, but through all these aspects that are dealing with the question of the child. And yes, I think there is many powers that we are not aware of it, that we can use, but somehow this networking and this connection and this exchange is crucial, because then we can feel better our position and what we are needing, and we have to articulate it and somehow try to talk about it more and more, and we will, I'm sure, find a way, because we have some wonderful examples how the people have really, the artists have really reacted. And I will tell it about it a little bit later, but this is when I will stop now, for the moment. I just wanted to stress that there is a strong power in artistry. Obviously, artists feel like that they have to react, but also we have to find out how to connect with each other in our basic cultural field, in our national field, in our international connections, to find out what and how we can work a little bit further to it. It's obviously that we have to speak a lot and connect us. Yeah.
Both, Yvette, do you have anything to add at this point regarding the notion of children's rights to culture and its complexity? Is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I wanted to just pick up on one point that Diana was just making now, where she was talking about the multiplicity that we're dealing with in this subject. And I think it's such an important thing to think about, that we are looking at diversity, and that diversity includes the diversity of childhood itself. So childhood, is not a monolithic thing. It is, an expression of cultural diversity. A 2-year-old has a different culture from a 7-year-old, has a different culture from a 14-year-old. And then on top of that, it is layered with the cultural identities that are being, shaped by the family or the school or the broader environment. And so, like adults, children have many intersecting identities. And I think that we need to be very aware of those intersecting identities as we are working, and we need to be respectful of those and tolerant of those, but we also need to be actively engaged with them. And I think that often where artists, Diana was again speaking about respect earlier, when artists are not aware of that is often when they fall into the pitfalls of assuming that children are one thing and can be spoken to in one way, or, and they make work that is in some way patronizing or inappropriate, or in fact, the very opposite of all the values that we've been describing now, values that would put the child in a path of self-expression and self-discovery and discovery of the world, etc. So, yeah, and I feel those tensions very much in my context, but I also have seen them around the world, because sometimes one or other identity becomes the most important for this particular artist or organization, and that needs, it kind of becomes imposed without a recognition of the other intersecting identities that are present. So I think that this is something that we as artists also need to really grapple with and become more aware of in the way that we work, and really try and be as inclusive as possible, in our approach.
Yeah. The one question is, when we are going to ask the children, we also have to have some knowledge about how to approach, and then an effective mission undoubtedly requires the joint action of several factors. It's not only about how we are going there. There is really quite a bigger question about necessity and to have in our education, in our artistry, in our academies, in our high schools, that we are having fantastic schools, but also we need more to know these approaches from the psychologists, from the other fields, and we have to be aware of how important is what I say. We have to be very honest in the approach, and also very, very responsible, which sometimes makes that the creation is kind of feeling like not free, but it's basically when you accept some very basic knowledge, then you can work really freely and be creative further. I think that the joint action of several actors in every moment is very necessary, and this is how we need to be more recognize the different sectors in the field whenever we are working something, and responsible in that sense, also from all levels of the authorities and artists. That's what I would like to stress. Yeah.
And if I may add now, Diana,
Yes.
because you just mentioned this collaboration and necessity to merge perspectives and to engage in dialogue. What I believe is that, at least in our local context, but I also think wider, we need to develop this dialogue between artists and people from the culture working with children, and those professions who are very close to understanding childhoods in plural, and these dimensions that Yvette is speaking about as well, about diversity, about inclusion. And I think when we approach participation, children's participation in culture, it is also very often that we think, if we ask children, what do you want? What do you think about this particular issue? That is enough. And that we need just to ask children, and children will give us answers. And what I think is more to engage together in the process of exploring what are the relevant issues for children, how children perceive the world, how can we engage in dialogue through art and culture with children. So rather than just asking and producing for them, how can we find each other when it comes to problematics or topics, when it comes to process, when it comes to medium of expression, and so on and so on. So it's about responsiveness and responsibility and this fundamental mutuality. And I think our field in pedagogy that I am in, and field of art and culture is supposed to learn from each other. And that is still something that needs to be developed.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we can continue in the direction of good practices and smart collaborations and good strategies now that maybe we understood a bit better the notion and the category of children's rights to arts in general. Maybe you could share or continue sharing some of the good practice examples in different societies you lived with, worked in, researched, especially those who you think might be relevant for our local context in Serbia. And then it would be great if you could maybe also get some of your give some of your recommendations and ideas what could be implemented here in Serbian scene and Serbian society, more practical, more concrete.
All right, I'll jump in quickly. So, I mean, I think that one of the things that we have found within our context in South Africa that we've been doing more and more of is working with finding advocates in the non-art sector. So moving beyond the arts sector, working a lot in education, obviously, because there's a natural synergy there, but not just in education. Also very much in the sort of social justice area. At the moment, for example, in South Africa, there is quite a push within our the social justice sector to make a child-centered legislation kind of central to everything in government. So they're looking at the role of the child or the place of the child across all sectors. And they are looking at it obviously in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of social development, you know, a whole lot of different areas. And so we've been working quite closely with this broader advocacy group, which has brought together a lot of different role players. And while, you know, initially, I think for some of the people who are involved, have been involved only in the arts up to date, initially found some of this quite alienating, and you know, it was a different language that was being spoken in a sense. I mean, what we've realized is that if we want the arts to be taken seriously by society at large, we actually have to be able to state the case of the arts in spaces where we are not talking to artists. And we also have to find those allies who are in these very different sectors. And we have a lot to learn from them. You know, artists are not always great activists. I mean, some combine both. But what I've discovered in the Social Justice Coalition is the most extraordinary activism and people who've known how to be activists on the ground in communities for many, many years. And in South Africa, of course, because of apartheid and a struggle against apartheid, there's a strong activist kind of culture. And this is something that we as artists can learn from. And we can think about how we can use some of these same techniques in order to make sure that our voices are heard and that we actually are taken seriously. But in order to, you know, we can't sit on the sidelines and complain then about the fact that arts and culture are not being given the priority that they should be given. We have to get ourselves involved. So I would say that the first thing is to really look at where in Serbia can these connections be made. What are the organizations that you could be working with that would move you out of just the art space into other spaces? One of the other significant things which has happened for us in the last year, or it's been a couple of years in the planning, but it's actually only concretely happened this year, is that we finally, as ASITEŽ South Africa, have a signed memorandum of agreement of partnership with the education department. That we are acknowledged as the partner for creative arts education in the curriculum and outside of the curriculum nationally now. And that is a very powerful tool, because it means that all of our members who have been working very much in isolation in their own little pockets in different communities and different towns in the country are now part of something which is the national partner to the Department of Basic Education. So I think finding ways to activate the network so that it is more powerful collectively is important as well, because then that gives you more of a voice and more of a space in which to make a real difference. But then, you know, we've been talking a little bit about artists and you know, what the skills that artists need in order to be able to really do this work in a meaningful way. And I think that that's another area that we can really put some attention into, you know, is how are we engaging with artists and how are we making this idea that, that you were talking about, Maša, about the participation of children being integral to the creation of work, you know, it not just being something that we are getting responses to later or whatever, that it's integral, that it's about that relationship that is built between the artist and the potential audience, or potentially the co-creators even of the work. That is really where real change starts to happen. So what are the spaces that we are creating for artists to experience that, or to test new ideas, or to, you know, pilot things? One of the things that we did in South Africa was we looked around the world, and obviously we had a little bit of help because I've been around the world a great deal with my my work in ASITEŽ as president. And, you know, we were able to identify that, for example, in Belgium, there is a really strong tradition of child participation in very professional artwork. So there's this combination of, on the one hand, you know, high professionalism, and on the other hand, a strong engagement with children and young people in the making of work. And so we invited a collaboration with Belgian artists in 2019, and we had a whole group of South African artists, each working with a different Belgian artist, and each one taking a slightly different angle on the idea of child participation. One was around the child as dramaturg to the work, one was on the child as co-creator to the work, and one was as the child as a kind of in mediation experiences around the work. So if there's a piece of work that's being created, how might children be involved before the piece or after the piece, you know, in some way? And we found that a really fascinating kind of case study for ourselves. And many of the artists who are involved in that program are now doing their own little pilots, if you like, their own projects, which are using those same principles and testing them in different environments. So I think that ASITEŽ as a network organization within a country can potentially look at what is it that our artists are needing, where can we find the expertise or the input that might be interesting for artists to engage with in our context, and then, you know, make that happen, because ultimately it will have ripple effects through the artistic community.
Thank you, Yvette. I just want to express my satisfaction when Yvette is saying about cooperation with other fields, having in mind the structure of today's conference as well. After this session, we are having a session exactly about collaboration with media, and then the final one is mostly about collaboration with educational institution and educational sector. So I think we are going in the good direction. Sorry, Diana, please. Just to unmute yourself for a bit.
Yeah, I'm very glad that that you have mentioned the high level of education of artists, because the fact that very recently, in October 21st, the Faculty of Dramatic Arts in Belgrade has made a protocol of cooperation with ASITEŽ Srbija. And this was between Association of Theatre for Children, ASITEŽ Srbija, and Faculty of Dramatic Arts. And I think this is really a very important step that we have finally made, because for years before, we have been working a lot on working with the young generation of artists. That was our strategic decision to work with the young professionals, to give them some knowledge and to add to their schooling about more recognition of the more visibility, and stress them the importance of the theater for young audiences and the possibilities that it is opening over there. So the very first day of this incubator part was also in that direction. The 3 different workshops and presentation been held on Faculty of Dramatic Arts, exactly toward that it was young students of different cathedrals have been involved in this one. But I would like also to say that we have something very important that happens in the last 2 years that are happening, right? And I think that I have to mention that ASITEŽ Srbija have been initiating through the next generation residency program in Novi Sad, the gathering of the young artists in the field of the theater for young audiences, in the field of through the whole region. And the intention was really to introduce one to each other, to make a meeting point from which they will start to think about and rethinking about the theater for young audiences in the whole region. And it is absolutely fantastic and terrific thing that while COVID was on, this group of the people, representatives, some of them from the region, they have established a platform that is working now very strongly, marking the problems and working towards the recognition and to better visibility of the whole field in the region, because as you may know, we have the same basic cultural background in the culture here in this area, and it is very important that we are talking between the different countries in this area here. And I would like also to say that there are many samples of how the theater people are coming out of the theater house, like from the independent scene is very strong and in making a lot of initiative, although that is a very hard conditions they are working in. For example, there is one sample of the theater makers who went in a little village 2 years ago, and then they went to work with the people, the children from the little village, very small number of them over there in Serbia. That is, I'm talking about Selo Markovac, about village Markovac, and the cultural center who have been now recognized as a very important part of the life of this small community. So there are many samples that we are having, how the people are reacting on themselves and also how they are gathering, but there is also, and also we are working toward communicating with the other fields. And this is one of the, I think, the trigger point moment when we would like to open more spaces to connect with the different fields. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. And Masha, do you have something to share from the Scandinavian or Swedish or?
Yes, I would like to respond to Diana's and also to share one Swedish example that I think it's very interesting to open up a space of strategic thinking, because even at the beginning when Diana said that a lot of artists here are responding to emergency situation, and a lot of examples that we have here and there, and a lot of initiatives. But it seems to me that in the local context, we are challenged by more strategic approach, where also policy and politics is integrated with local practices and these good practices. And in that sense, I would like to share one interesting example that I was involved in Sweden. And it was a nationwide initiative called Creative Schools. And it was a part of national policy for bringing culture to all children without discrimination. So local municipalities all around Sweden were making collaboration. So it was local authorities and municipalities artists, cultural institutions, but also independent scene in all spheres of art, and educational institutions. And the principle was that on the local level, cultural people and educational people apply for strategic project in their local community. And it can be a small village like Markovac, as Diana mentioned. It can also be Stockholm and some municipality in Stockholm, so all around the country. But the whole idea was that the local initiatives should be built bottom up, and these projects should be highly participatory, inclusive, and of course, they had to have a quality cultural process and product at the end. So it was interesting how to use local resources and local budgets, because there is always some budget for culture, for children, for social protection as well, welfare, also anti-discrimination policy, and so on. So how to integrate all these sectors on the local level, and how to use culture as a collaborative force for tackling all these social issues, but basically for children's participation in culture and for collaboration between artists and between schools. And the projects were very, very different. For example, in some municipalities, it was about producing a play, theater play, through participatory work with young people. In some, it was, for example, theater on wheels. So it was a collaborative production, and the play was traveling around with interactive discussions and so on and so on. There was also many other fields of art involved. But for me, this was a very interesting example because it shows how national politics, which cares about implementation for children's rights, can be implementing from up to the bottom, but also from bottom up. And I think Sweden in this strategic approach is quite good, actually. Now they also have, there is a law based on Convention of the Child's Rights Convention. So all rights are supposed to be implemented through the law and through the mechanism of law. So that is maybe interesting to think about how can we use resources that are already there, and how to make these strategic partnerships in our local context. Because we fall down somehow. We have these great initiatives which are great also globally. And we know that there are a lot of examples from Serbia which are recognized, and a lot of quality work that is recognized. But when it comes to systemic work and systemic approach, I have to say, fall short. So it is the next step, I think, that we need to make in order to sustain all these initiatives.
Yeah. If I may add, yes, this is you are right in a point. This is what we are, does a cultural strategic development, is cultural politics, do we have it or not? Yes, we have it, but it doesn't work. It's not in the time that we are now needing. So in a way, I think this is also our duty to articulate very clearly, and to, very much as I think Yvette have said it, we don't have the skills to articulate these things. Like, this is a problem in a way, but yes, we need to articulate exactly what we need, and give suggestions. We have suggestions with the good samples. That's why I'm mentioning them. I'm so proud of those different ways of understanding how you can really tackle and raise up the visibility of a necessity of the culture in a small village like in Markovac. We had these cultural centers buildings in every corner of the Serbia, in ex-Yugoslavia as well, and they have been devastated in the 90s. We have lost them. Now this village, after 2 years of understanding that their children are getting really very quality the programs that is going on over there, based from the very bottom of the theater performance, and later on the library and developing all the things, they went back to this Dom Kulture, the House of the Culture, and they cleared it and starting again. They have resources, they've been forgetting it. Isn't it fantastic? And I think many samples, like for example, in Šabac, in a institutional theater, there was a few years ago started the gathering of the whole community of the young ones, opening up the door of the theater for them to come in and to make the club of the young ones who are having and finding themselves inside of the theater as somebody who is working over there on the visibility of the necessity of the culture in the whole community. Isn't it wonderful? We have these things, we have these wonderful samples, but then somehow we are losing the battle because it's in a way not understanding in the system in between connection, really good conversation. That's what I said in the this morning. We started with that we really need basically dialogue, and we are willing to work towards developing and using our resources. This is what I'm very happy to say it, that
maybe
we need it.
Inkubator can play a role in this, because documenting all these examples and sharing them and inventing ways, like with this crucial examples with Shabbat's theater, for example, with Markovats and the play in the village. I think it's about documenting, inventing ways, and finding these strategic partnerships to develop further and advocate further for systemic approaches.
Yeah, I just want to add that this OK method is now published in a one brochure, and we are going to develop it through the next year as well. We are approaching that way. We are working on it. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing all these examples and information on practices in from South Africa, Sweden, Belgium, and also our local context. We hope we all now have maybe at least a little bit more ideas or suggestions or directions in mind how we can improve situation in Serbia regarding children's rights to arts. Final round of my question. We started this topic earlier. We talked a bit about COVID and about crisis and the importance of children's rights to arts and cultural children access to rights and culture, even in the situations in which some other basic rights are maybe, well, basic or all is basic, we discussed it, are also endangered. So if you have anything to add at the moment on how has children's rights to culture been either endangered, either improved, challenged, reconceptualized in the previous year and a half of COVID crisis, and what should we maybe learn from it? We touched this topic at the beginning, but we now have some more time to discuss it.
I think from my point of view in South Africa, what's happened is that there's been a growing recognition of the value of the arts for health and well-being. So this is a positive, in that both, it's a positive and a negative. I mean, it's a negative in the sense that children have not had access to the arts in the same way, but through that experience, we've been getting feedback that they need that access in some way or another. It's created a sort of a greater sense of urgency to the provision of the arts, because people are beginning to recognize that it's so central to health and well-being. And so as an example, ASITEŽ was asked to come into a project last year to support children who were finishing their schooling and who'd had this incredibly disrupted year of schooling, and who were just not feeling able to cope with the looming exams and, you know, and so we were able at the end of last year to do a series of arts-based workshops, which were about basically centering yourself, you know, feeling, using the arts as a self-reflection tool and as an empowerment tool to give yourself both a feeling of being in control and recognizing your own capacities. So this was a very useful thing that happened, and teachers are now asking for us to do this again. So I think that there is a growing recognition of this aspect. One of the other areas that has of course been very problematic and difficult to navigate, particularly for us in South Africa, has been the fact that so much work has gone online as a result of COVID. And while we've been able to do some work in that way, we've done a lot of storytelling online, for example, and we've done some, we've had some play readings online where we've been able to engage with children directly. and they've given feedback to plays and various kinds of things. And what we also recognize is that this is another form of discrimination, because in South Africa, data is so expensive. And so for children to have access to data and to be able to participate online, they have to have support of some kind. And so it also meant that ASITEŽ then started to do some rather strange for us things. For example, we started to create more actual practical tools that children could use. So we created activity packs that children could use at home, which could be delivered to children when they were coming for, there was a lot of food parcels that were being given out, or daily feeding schemes for children who were in townships and didn't have access to food in the pandemic. And so with that, we were giving out these activity packs that had been developed in order for them to have something with which they could play and could inspire them to some kind of artistic and creative activity. So we've had to be very adaptive, and I think that it has demonstrated to us all the resilience of artists and their, capacity to shift and to find new ways of doing things. But it has also revealed these big gaps, and the fact that in the end, the online experience might be a way of doing something, but it's certainly not the same as, and it's not as good as, that direct contact that can happen between artists and young people or children. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Diana, is there anything you would like to share on practices and learnings from the COVID situation in Serbia that you didn't have the chance to present earlier?
Well, I think I have touched many of the aspects that I wanted to say today through this conversation, maybe not in an order that I wanted, but I just want to mention that at this very moment, it is so clear we have these many manifestation of many manifestation of negative influences of emotional and social competencies, and that it's really like a very urgent moment that we have to react all together, because it is obviously, it's like we have to stand on our feet, all of us. We know how now have clear indicators of the devastating effects of the consequences of the COVID on the mental health of the children. And I think it's just an alert situation that people recognize it. And in that sense, it is like at the beginning says, it's a really challenging time where in one hand we are like stuck in a space that we can't work much, but then we have this as a huge challenge to work exactly and to make it more visible, and obviously that art is helping a lot in this crisis time, and we have to work together with the other institution and representatives, and this is it. Absolutely, it's a really crucial moment when we can, unfortunately, because of this crisis, it's an alert situation where we have to work, and I think we are starting with this one. We would love to impulse the many more discussions, and not only discussions, but the actions. I hope so it will happen next year during 2020.
Thank you. Maša, any final comments on this topic maybe?
Yeah, I would just like to share that through my other work, participatory work with young people, whole last year I was in touch with a group of young people who were exactly speaking about how COVID influenced their daily dynamic, the way how they relate to each other, what kind of questions are there, how they deal with uncertainty. And both in line with what Diana and Yvette said, yes, online connection has some advantages, make some things easier, but what was the main conclusion was, what is then the real contact, the real touch, not only physical touch, but also physical touch, but also how do we deeply connect? And with these young people, we made this initiative to experiment with digital tools, but also other methods, how during COVID we can act together. And young people also said that when there is an opportunity to connect and to engage also in art and culture, they feel more empowered and more able to cope and to share with others, both their experiences, but also their hopes. And I think one of the questions in this situation, and particularly in the Balkan, is what are the hopes of the new generation? And very often we face challenges that often we feel there is no hope for the Balkan. But actually these young people say, if we have connections, if we have tools, then we can build up the hope. And I think that's absolutely crucial for us to create spaces and provide conditions and tools for this to happen.
Thank you, Maša. Thank you all speakers. Now we have some time for possible comments or reflections or questions from the colleagues here on Zoom. Is there anyone who would like to also give contribution to this conversation additionally to everything that was said, maybe to add something or ask speakers for some more information, for some clarification or some opinion that I didn't already ask for? If there is some question or feedback or suggestion, colleagues could write in chat or join the conversation. In the meantime, I can ask one or open additional topic. It is interesting how tools of the national government, local governments, cultural institutions, and individual artists and cultural professionals are not the same. So there are different responsibilities and different tools at the disposal for different stakeholders. And Yvette already mentioned in ASITEŽ manifesto, there is also different responsibilities and mechanism at the disposal recognized for different stakeholders. But what would you say, what are maybe some of the most important or most relevant responsibilities or tools for different stakeholders? What would you emphasize maybe as some of the first steps for improving the situation regarding children access? What are some of the first steps or most important steps in this whole discourse?
One of the first steps is some kind of research. I mean, don't think you can do anything without research. And I think that there needs to be a mapping, essentially, of what is working, what isn't working, what is being provided, where is it being provided, who is excluded, and very importantly, so that kind of mapping is really important if we're going to be talking about any kind of systemic change or any kind of engagement which is going to be about different role players coming together. We need to have a real sense of what is happening and what has the impact of COVID been on this as well, because what we've also seen is that many companies that were strong pre-COVID have either been liquidated or they're no longer operating. So where we had assumptions that there was something that was accessible, it's perhaps that assumption is now wrong because COVID has hit many companies and artists hard. And so I think that's one aspect that really needs looking at. Another aspect is obviously also thinking about, how can this kind of work needs to be funded in some way. We need to find ways, if we're going to talk about equal opportunities and equal access, then we're not talking about a commercial model where children are going to be paying, X number of euros or whatever it is in order to see a theatre production, because then that's not equal access. So we've got to find a way where there is some free access, or there's some, however it's managed, whether it's free or whether it's kind of on a scale according to capacity or whatever, but that we're not working with a purely commercial model. So who are the players who could potentially be supporting this work? One of the things that we've found in South Africa, which may not be the case in Serbia, I don't know, but there have been different relief funds that have been offered to society in different guises, because obviously different parts of society have been hit very hard. One of those is not a normal funding for the arts. It's in fact a social employment fund, and it's directed at young people who are unemployed. And in South Africa, we have a very high unemployment rate. At least 50% of the people under 35 are unemployed, which is really appalling. So But yet this is also the age group into which many of our artists fit. So what we've tried to look at is how could we as an arts organization access funding that is in fact intended for social employment purposes, for youth employment, to benefit artists. And I can't tell you if we're going to be successful with that, because we're still in the process and we have to wait and hear whether, you know, we will get the funding or not. But again, it was about trying to look for a different mechanism outside of our usual funding, you know, areas, to try and support the access at this time. So yes, I would say those are two very important things. And then the other part of the mapping, of course, is precisely what we were doing earlier. It's talking about these great examples, you know, finding the, you know, what are the initiatives that you feel, oh, if we could just have one of those in every village, town, you know, what would they be? If we could just have this project on a much bigger scale, what would it be? And then, you know, to think about what we might be able to do to make that possible.
Thanks so much, Yvette. Maša, Diana, do you agree that research and mapping is the first step, or can we challenge that? Are there other approaches challenging that research is the first thing to do?
I wouldn't say it's about challenging. I really feel it is about getting a picture what works and what doesn't work. And of course, a lot of us have a sense what doesn't work, maybe even more than what works. But I also think that in our local context, I would just like to add something to what Yvette just said. And that is that because we have policies, we have institutions, and often they're not functioning in the practice. So the question is, who is the group who can advocate, who can pinpoint, and to which instances, what is functioning and what is not functioning, and what could be some potential steps. So what I see more is to find some kind of even movement of people who are interest groups in this field, who have interest to improve what is possible to do when it comes to implementation to children's rights to culture, and then act on many different levels. And meanwhile, so research, advocacy of the group of people who has interest in this, and documenting good practices and communicating good practices. So that's what I would see as.
Thank you very much. Diana, anything to add? Some of the most important first steps, some more first steps. Just unmuting first, please. First step.
Yes, the first step is to unmute myself. Sorry. Yeah, it seems like we are always like at the first step, but it doesn't. I just want to say, although that we think that we feel like stuck in something which is not going further, everything is changing every moment. And I think that it will be something says about it, how the difference is in the last 10 years. It is the problem with that we are having very often the circles of the elections and the changes of the people in the places where we have just reached them and introduced them and sensibilized to this topic. But somehow it seems that the awareness is slowly from the different fields is really growing. And what I have discovered, like, for example, last long time we have been working and asking what is the problem with, what are the cultural subjects that we are giving and offers to the teenagers, and what they need. But there are some investigations and researchers, and I think this is really very important because from many, the problem is that we don't see them. Like Maša have mentioned, that we don't see one particular place or one group or something or movement, whatever it is, where we can interconnect and say what is going on in this field, which is very important. For example, we are having now the research about the teenagers' their wishes and things like that. We even did not know about it in a way. We are not aware of it. Do we use it or not? We will talk about it. I think we need to be more curious and to find out among ourselves the way how to make a spot where we can really interact and find out what is going on. It's obviously that it is very many impulses and the things that are going on, but we don't know for each other. There is no place that there is a collective place, like it should be, in a way that we know for exactly what is going on in the field, in the different fields that matters children's rights. And also, especially the children's rights are always represented through the specter of the law. It's like that, but then this where we are losing this Article 13 and 31, because there is always something, as Yvette at the beginning says, there are always urgent, some other things. This is a moment when the urgent is out as well, because it can happen. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Big thank you for all the three speakers in the first session, as well as two colleagues who listened this opening conversation of today's conference. We hope it was useful and inspiring for some maybe new programs, new interventions, new initiatives, and maybe even policies that could possibly be presented at the World Conference of Theatre for Youth and Children in 2023 that will happen in Belgrade and Novi Sad, that we have the pleasure and the task to host. We are out of time for this first session, and I can invite you that after 3 minutes break, stay for the second session that will happen in Serbian, and that will be held under the title Building a Community, Media and Arts for Children and Youth, that will start at 11:30. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.